Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're looking at PPSR protection during COVID-19. We're going to look at the current PPSR market, where we are now, what's ahead, and how to protect yourself from businesses or the risks that businesses are currently facing. I'm here from CreditorWatch, and here is a little bit about CreditorWatch. We're Australia's leading commercial credit bureau with over 50,000 customers. Our products include credit reporting, monitoring and alerts, our debt collection tools, PPSR and data washing, and Apply Easy, which is our online credit application and decisioning tool. Our guest today is Terry Ledlin from Ledlin Lawyers, who specialises in credit, collections, commercial documentation, litigation and insolvency. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Paul.
Here's a bit more about Terry. Unfortunately, as you can see, he is a Parramatta Eels supporter.
Plenty of room on the bandwagon, Paul. Feel free to do that.
And as you can see, he's a bit about me. Unfortunately for my wife, I still don't look like Tom Cruise.
Or Brad Pitt, Paul.
No, I'm working on it.
Yeah.
So, Terry, it's been a big 12 months, certainly a big 2020. Before we get into the PPSR market, we probably need to look at where we are now and how we got here. So let's take a quick look back at the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's easy to forget when these days a week feels like a month and a month feels like a year, and it's easy to forget where we've come from. So back in 2019, of course, the Morrison government was elected, and there were, I think by anybody's measure, there were challenging economic times ahead. In December 2019, we had the first case of coronavirus that was reported in Wuhan. Would you believe that was only 9 months ago? In 2019, in November, for example, we had drought plus bushfires. One day in November 2019, we actually had 300 new fires in New South Wales in one day. And in January 2020, of course, who can forget those bushfire images, people on beaches waiting to be rescued, smoke-filled days around the country. And of course, in terms of how we got here today, the World Health Organization, only on the 30th of January this year, announced that coronavirus was declared to be a public health emergency only. So, of course, let's move to March. March, who declares COVID-19 as a pandemic? Pandemic, a word really that we had only come across in the movies, Contagion. We'd heard it, of course, for things like Ebola or SARS, but really didn't ram home until I think that point of time. We were then subjected to daily press conferences from the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer, and things like WFH, Zoom, Teams became commonplace. And sadly, of course, what became commonplace was increasing unemployment and the spread of the virus. Again, in March 2020, there were support packages announced by the Morrison government, JobSeeker, JobKeeper, support for business and the unemployed. Temporary measures, they were meant to be, included relief from short-term limits for stat demands and bankruptcy notices. That, of course, brings us to where we are today. And today, of course, we have what might be referred to as the Victorian setbacks. which appears to be a second wave, and it's showing quite clearly just how fast and deadly this virus can spread. We've also seen the closure of borders, heightened awareness, and dare I say it, the emergence of carrot from Bunnings. Support packages introduced in March have been reduced and extended now until March 2021.
Terry, that's a lot to take in. I guess where to now, and what's coming up that will really impact businesses?
Well, we suspect that what's ahead is more of the same and perhaps even worse. It depends a little bit on where you're located or where your business is located. Obviously, there are places that have gotten on top of the pandemic, places like New Zealand, for example. But we have to assume that the worst is still to come. There's only so much government support and stimulus that can be provided. The question of how this is all paid for is one of those cans that just gets kicked down the road. But at this stage, it appears the government's more concerned about keeping the economy in a state of hibernation until such time as the pandemic is under control, or at least manageable without a huge loss of life. The overriding truth, though, is the limits of government support will be reached. So our advice is we need to start taking coping strategies for when that support eventually finishes. On 25th of September this year, changes to insolvency legislation will end, which means there'll no longer be extended periods of time for compliance with bankruptcy notices and stat demands. There's been commentary about extending those changes, but we're still expecting a huge influx of bankruptcies and external administrations. It's worthwhile noting that the ATO has not had an active role in insolvency proceedings, but this is sure to change because there are still liabilities that need to be met, like unpaid GST, superannuation, PAYG, where directors may be personally liable, and also claims for, once companies go into liquidation, uncommercial transactions. And we'll talk about this later. Of course, there are preferences that aren't covered by the moratorium. There's also been comment around bank deferrals and rent abatements. And it's important to remember, I think, that all of these measures, there's a big difference. A deferral is not a forgiveness. At some stage, the piper has to be paid. The bank has to be paid, even if it means over a longer period of time. All of these measures are short-term, designed to give temporary relief, not long-term relief. You need to be ready for the day that the deferral monies are due and payable. And as far as creditors are concerned, obviously there will continue to be certain leniency from creditors. And whilst businesses have been prepared and perhaps financially capable to give extended credit and payment terms, or even allow payment terms, there will come a point where this is no longer sustainable or viable, and debts will have to be chased at some stage or written off.
Well, Terry, let's have a look at how much our customers and businesses have been impacted by COVID-19. Here's a quick poll for you to tell us whether you have been impacted. And if you can answer whether your business has improved, if you've seen no change, and or if it has decreased. We'll give you a couple of moments there to answer that. Okay, just sharing the results there. We can see that almost half of you have said that business has decreased, and the other overwhelming majority is that there's been no change to your business.
Okay. So what do we bring from that? Clearly, there are many businesses that are struggling. So to try and give you a visual tool as to how this might be interpreted, there's a article that we did that you can find on the CreditorWatch blog, and we call it the Plimsoll line test. So for those of you who aren't shipworthy, so to speak, the Plimsoll line is a line placed on a ship's hull that was developed to indicate when a ship might be so heavily overloaded that it ran a serious risk of turning over and sinking. So if we think of this Plimsoll line as a line that represents the acceptable financial performance of a business, and that will change obviously depending on the business, but the acceptable financial performance of a business, then we can plot where a business might stand in relation to that line. If you have a look at the image and the boats, we've got some boats above that line and some below that line that are sinking, or indeed some have shipwrecked. The ones that are on top of the lines, the ones that are exceeding the acceptable financial performance might be heading up, or they may be falling behind and heading down. Some businesses will always be beneath the line, some are plunging fast, and others are trying desperately hard to get to that line. So our experience, and this is even before the pandemic, is that the majority of businesses are beneath that line. Many businesses are struggling. That was the case at the time of the last election. They weren't meeting what would be considered to be an acceptable financial performance. The current circumstances are going to exacerbate that position. There'll be more businesses that will continue to go below the line, and that's a warning sign for all of us.
Thanks for that analogy, Terry. So I guess another quick poll for you all. Where do you see your business sitting in relation to the Plimsoll line? Are you winning the Sydney to Hobart, staying afloat, or are you sinking? Again, we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer those questions. Okay, so look, in terms of results, you can see there 77% of you have said that you're staying afloat. 1% have said that you're sinking, and surprisingly 22% have said that you're actually winning the Sydney to Hobart.
Okay, that's heartening. Can I just make a quick comment about that? Just some good news to think about if you can get some good news out of this. There's two things that you should bear in mind. One is that recessions can make you lean. They're not necessarily a bad thing. They cause you to look closely at all of your overheads and where you can trim the size, so to speak. And the second thing is, of course, a lot of people, a lot of businesses are being forced to rethink their business model. I think the question people have to ask is, can you pivot? What do you need to do to make yourself continue to be sustainable during these types of scenarios, economic conditions?
Okay, great, Terry. So I guess now we have a picture of where we are and where we're going. Obviously, I'm the PPSR specialist here at CreditorWatch, so I think it'd be good to get an understanding of the current state of the PPSA.
Okay, so since December 2018, AFSA has held a roundtable event to meet with small business champions and advocates with the aim of conducting market research and gaining feedback on the PPSR. Market research for the 2020 Small Business Roundtable emerged with 4 key themes. A lack of understanding, a lack of support, the complexity around the legislation and enforcement. So if we look carefully at those, it should give us a bit of a practical overview of where the PPSR is right now. So let's start with the lack of awareness or a lack of understanding. AFSA found that once a small business operator understood the PPSR, the majority wanted to use it as a means of being a secured creditor. It was highlighted, though, that many small businesses lacked a sufficient understanding of how the PPSR could be used. That then led, of course, to a perception that there was a lack of support for small business. There was a recognition that there was a range of resources and information, but the challenge was having it in the right language, in the right place, at the right time. Participants called in for focus on specialist content participants call for focus from specialist content from knowledgeable advisors and accessible support services to help businesses set themselves up for the PPS registry and to use it effectively. Complexity was another issue. We've said this before, but the legislation is highly prescriptive and the language itself is difficult even for lawyers to get their head around. So that, of course, makes it more difficult for small business. So there's a marked difference, the Roundtable found, between how experienced and inexperienced users approach the registration process. Users didn't understand the consequences of the decisions they were making in relation to the PPS register. And of course, finally, the Roundtable gave several insights into participants' attitudes towards enforcement. Small businesses agreed there's a need for guidance to help them navigate through the complex insolvency process. Over 75% of participants said they would seek advice, but half of the participants said that they wouldn't engage a lawyer because they thought it would be too expensive.
Okay, thanks for that, Terry. So I guess another quick poll for our listeners. Are you currently registering on the PPSR? Okay, so I guess sharing those results, Terry, it looks like we have about 50, almost half that are registering and some that aren't. And I guess for those of you that aren't, it'd be good to find out why you're not registering at the moment as well.
Okay, so one of the takeaways also from the AFSA Roundtable and also the results of that poll question is that people need more knowledge around the PPSA and the registration process. I know, Paul, that CreditorWatch has a product in respect of this, and I think you're going to now take our listeners through it.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So look, obviously, I've done a number of webinars on PPSR logic, so I won't go through a demonstration of the system today, but I think one of the key things that you touched on is the fact that the process can be quite difficult. What we've tried to do with our platform, what we have done with our platform is try and make it as simple as possible for everyone, and making the process quick and easy and linked to a credit file or our online application tool, Apply Easy. So it makes it easy for credit managers, CFOs, even accounts receivable team to process new applications as they come in, evaluate the credit worthiness of their customers and register the PPSR straight away from that process. So not missing out on creating that registration in the timely manner that it certainly needs to be. Within the tool itself, we do provide some great and unique alerts on expiring registrations, and that's obviously another issue that businesses come up with. They find that they don't have a security interest in a lot of situations where a registration's expired. And we also provide a number of search options above and beyond that, which the government provides. And of course, the process, as I touched on, is an easy to navigate one-click process for users. So I guess, Terry, it looks like we are in a lot of economic trouble right now. What do you see are the risks for businesses at the moment, and how can yours and our customers protect themselves against those risks?
Okay, well, the first risk that we see is what's been referred to as zombie businesses for you sci-fi addicts. We've all heard about it. Experts are predicting that there's an army of zombie businesses quietly marching towards the Australian economy in September when the government starts to reduce its support measures. Troubled businesses, with many of them struggling before the coronavirus, staying alive partly because of the changes to insolvency laws and government stimulus. That really is the definition of a zombie business. It's one that's been propped up. In June, Paul, your own CEO, Patrick Coughlin, spoke with the Herald, Sydney Morning Herald, and said that CreditorWatch figures showed at least 600 business administrations have gone missing, and an explosion of bankruptcies was predicted for the final 3 months of the year when government stimulus is wound back gradually. Every year, between 8,000 and 9,000 firms are put into administration, but figures for March, April and May show a sharp drop in insolvency actions. We've noticed also that there are fewer insolvency-based court actions compared to the same period in 2019. Courts are also dealing with matters much differently online, having physically closed the doors in many jurisdictions, and this has initially led to a backlog in some lists. And of course, many businesses, many of your customers, are owed money, but they're not forcing their debtors to pay up due to the pandemic, but may start to run short as financial pressures hit creditors. This means there could be a lot of companies out there that should have been wound up, but haven't.
That's a really, really good point, Terry.
Okay, so zombies and what goes with zombies, but of course the Walking Dead. And by that we mean the Walking Dead guarantors, usually company directors. So if the zombies are waiting at the bottom of the economic cliff, then the directors who own them and have given personal guarantees are the great Walking Dead. So for many suppliers, a personal guarantee taken from an owner or director is a common feature of the onboarding process. Many of our clients take personal guarantees, and many listeners of this webinar will too. But what happens in September when suppliers have been patient and forgiving and supportive to their zombie customers for months, only then to be faced with non-payment anyway? That's when more and more of these personal guarantees will rise from the dead, so to speak. We anticipate many suppliers will be unable to obtain payment from their zombie customers and will instead turn to the individuals guaranteeing the debts.
So, Terry, the third risk is the increased cost of living.
Yeah, we see that as a risk. It's perhaps not been fully explored at this stage, but for example, on the 4th of June this year, KPMG reported the Australian government's combined economic support package was providing a $259 billion. That's what it totaled, or 13.3% of GDP. And they were support measures for workers, household and business. Now, some would argue the responses worked in cushioning the economic blow. Others, of course, say, well, how are we going to pay for all of this? And in some countries, in fact, a number of countries, and I'm sure I've seen it here too, If you look up the hashtag COVID tax, it's the fear of increased excises, duties, taxes, prices, and surcharges for everything from dining at a restaurant to increased income tax. You may have noticed some of these already. For example, a COVID surcharge at the end of your cafe bill or other bill could become as regular as the 10% surcharge applied on Sundays and public holidays. So you've got an increased cost of living that will undoubtedly flow through to an increased cost for business. And an example of that is, of course, high insurance premiums for business. One that we think gets overlooked a bit. The ABC recently had a program where the Chief Executive of the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, Carmel Donnelly, was interviewed about the financial viability of the Workers' Compensation Insurance Scheme, even before COVID hit. Ms. Donnelly said that many costs have increased the liabilities for the scheme, such as increasing cost of medical expenses. That ultimately leads to higher insurance premiums for business. So when a business is already struggling from a revenue point of view, struggling from the impact of bushfires and coronavirus, increase business costs like insurance premiums, and that too will add to the stress, and indeed in some cases businesses may not even be able to pay that, which obviously affects their capacity to continue. And of course,
a question I get asked about a lot is unfair preference claims. It definitely seems to be a question that's getting asked more and more now. Yeah, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that as well.
Okay, well, I know a lot of people would like to see the end of the preference scheme, the preference system, for want of a better word, but at the moment it's there, and at this point of time we don't see it changing. So what it means is preference claims, of course, is one of those areas in insolvency that wasn't included in the insolvency changes. So how it might work is this: if you're a supplier, you're more likely to accept payment arrangements during this pandemic. And of course, you're more likely to relax payment terms. However, we would anticipate an influx of unfair preference claims towards the end of the year after many companies go into liquidation. This is assuming, of course, that there's no extension of this insolvency moratorium. There has been some talk in some circles about that being extended, but at this stage, there's nothing official. So companies also are being faced with reputational issues by not wanting to be seen to be harsh or unfair on their customers. And of course, there's a lot of businesses that use the government stimulus to pay off pre-COVID debts, leaving them unable to pay current debts. One way, of course, to protect yourself from a preference claim is to get yourself into a secured position. Become a secured creditor, leapfrog over unsecured creditors. And of course, you can do that by utilising the PPSR and obtaining charges over companies and directors' property, both real and personal. Get as much security as you can upfront and enforce it where possible. Finally, of course, particular industries at risk. This is probably the start of a fairly long list, but the ones that obviously stand out are travel, hospitality, education, of course, and retail. And of course, location, as we said before, plays a part when we talk about COVID. Some areas are doing a lot worse than others. If you were in Melbourne, where you've got stage 4, then you're subject to very severe restrictions. If, on the other hand, you're in far north Queensland or New Zealand, then your operating conditions would be much different. So location of your business has a lot to do with where you find yourself, pandemically speaking.
Well, Terry, it seems like there are a lot of risks that businesses are facing these days. So I guess as our final question, we'd like to ask our listeners, what do you think is the biggest risk to your business So I've just launched that poll now. Really, is it zombie businesses, the Walking Dead guarantors, the increased cost of living, unfair preference claim, or is it industry-specific risk that you see? Or maybe it's something else. We'll give you a couple of minutes to respond to that. Okay, so to share the results there, and Terry, not surprisingly, it is zombie businesses that the biggest risk. I guess from your point of view, how do businesses really protect themselves from these risks?
Well, forewarned is forearmed, as they say. There are 4 quick things that we would suggest. One is get yourself organised. Don't wait until it's too late to realise you've got problems with your documentation. So review your documentation, review your personal guarantees, because you may well need to use them. See what kind of shape they're in. Make sure that your subsidiaries are included perhaps in any personal guarantee. If possible, make sure that the guarantee itself has been validly executed and completed. Also consider having PPSA clauses in your personal guarantees so that you have a security interest over any personal property owned by directors or guarantors. For example, Paul, your extensive collection of classic cars, if you had signed a personal guarantee, then of course that collection might be able to be something that a creditor could capture. I know your classic car is probably a 1950 Mazda, but there you go. Secondly, we say write it in stone. Renegotiate your contracts if you have to. Make sure that your terms are updated. Make sure you register on the PPSR. Now could be a good time to renegotiate your contracts. For example, you could offer your customer an extension to pay in return for a security, for example, a PPSR registration. Also, get judgment ready, get your ducks in line. Just make sure that if you go down the legal path, you're not going to be hindered by lack of documentation, by lack of invoices, by lack of notes, by lack of... So have the bank details also for any guarantors. People don't realise, but to apply for a guarantee these days, you need specific bank accounts. The shotgun approach that used to be in use not so long ago no longer applies. If you want to guarantee somebody, you need specific details. You can get that at this point of time. And of course, get help early. Everybody says it, not too many people do it, but seriously, the outlook is not positive, and the more you can do now, then the better position you'll be in terms of protection. So do regular comprehensive credit checks. You need to know how your customers are travelling. Don't try and reply to letters from liquidators making preference claims yourself. Review your contracts, forewarned, forearmed, that type of stuff. And I think, Paul, I think CreditorWatch obviously has some products that assist in that regard. You might just briefly mention.
Yeah, absolutely, Terry. So obviously we've gone through PPSR logic, and most of our listeners would be aware of CreditorWatch and our credit reports and monitoring service. But one of the other products we've seen that's had a lot of uptake in the last 6 to 12 months has been our debtor logic product, which is it's a data-driven analysis of your age trial receivables balance. So it helps identify your customers' payment trends across the market. So not just how they're paying you, but how they're paying all of their suppliers. I guess traditionally what we see is that collectors usually chase the older debtors first. And obviously this can feel like they're getting blood from a stone. So what debtor logic does is helps to identify customers who are more likely to pay meaning you can get a positive impact on your DSO with a lot less effort. The good thing about DebtorLogic is it's the only trade program that combines small business data and corporate trade data. So usually traditional trade programs have only concentrated on collecting data from corporate customers, and they're usually the best paid customers in Australia. But we add in the SME trade payment data, so you receive a much clearer picture of how the market's actually getting paid. I guess one of the big things with DebtorLogic, you'll be able to quickly and easily see a customer's creditworthiness and payment behaviour by getting a hybrid credit score, which is their creditworthiness, but also their payment predictability. You can see how your customers are paying you in comparison to the market. So they may be using you as a bank to pay out their higher tiered suppliers more quickly. You can respond to changing payment trends more quickly, which I think is something we're going to see in the next few months. And you can prioritise your collections and adjust your payment trend of terms and manage your expectations with your customers as well. What we've certainly seen in that payments in June were overdue by an average of 49 days across all industries. That's 342% higher than the June 2019 figure. So we want to help our customers, stay on top of any late payment behaviour that creeps into their ledger over the next few months. Certainly, as you've mentioned a few times, as government subsidies reduce or come to an end. And Terry, you've also got a solution that might help our customers and yours.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So we've developed what we call a lead check. It's a free contract health check. If you submit your terms and conditions to us, we'll review them, give them a score out of 10. We identify the high, medium and low risks in your documentation and give you tips to improve. The thing to really note here though, Paul, is if you're after comprehensive security, then you need a comprehensive PPSA clause in your terms to allow you to register your security interest. So we see lots of clients who have a PPSA clause in their terms, but the clause doesn't actually create a security interest, or it might limit the rights available. So there's no point in going through a process of registering on a PPSR only to find that your clause isn't actually as strong as what you thought. And for those people who think their terms and conditions are up to scratch but just want us to review the clauses, their PPSA clauses, we can do that as well through LeadCheck. All you need to email us is to email us, there's details there. Or if you've got a contact at CreditorWatch that you'd prefer to go through, like Paul or Lucinda, they can easily pass your details.
Thanks very much, Terry. Now, there have been a couple of questions that have come through in relation to the webinar. I am aware that we are going over time quite significantly here, but Terry, one of the questions that has come through has been around the provisions or allowances around statutory demands and the extensions in time on those. One of the questions specifically was that the extended period was up until the 25th of September. Do you believe this period is going to be extended significantly with the law changes, or do you think it's going to be a hard and fast 25 September?
I think we will see an extension. I think we will probably see that extended through to March. That may not have been the case had Victoria not been hit so badly. I noticed the other day that there was a report emanating out of Fox News where a reporter gave a roll goal solid guarantee that it would be extended. I've also seen some commentary amongst insolvency practitioners indicating that it will be extended, and I would think it's more likely than not that it will, which really just to some degree puts off the inevitable. So we may see it in a reduced form. The other thing that I think is worthy of note is that there is now some movement amongst academics and others of having a rethink about the insolvency laws. If you step back and think about it for a second, what you've got is privately funded liquidations. In bankruptcy, of course, a lot of bankruptcies are undertaken by AFSA. So it's almost like a public trustee, so to speak, a public bankruptcy trustee funded by government. Sadly, for companies, that's not so much the case. It's outsourced to the profession, who have to bear a lot of expense in dealing with that, often for no return. You've got companies, zombie companies, that may have nothing. So insolvency practitioners that I've spoken to have said, well, what choice are we going to have? We will just have to go after the directors. We'll have to, if it's possible, take actions against directors. So these moratoriums will work for a little while, but ultimately, I think the day of reckoning will come. From a secured creditor point of view, as we said before, if you're secured, you can avoid a lot of this pain. So again, we're always saying, get your ducks in line, take steps now, so that perhaps when that day comes, then you'll be in a much better position than what you are now.
Fantastic, thanks Terry. Look, there are quite a few questions that you have put forward. Unfortunately, we just don't have time this afternoon to answer all of those, but if you have put a question forward, we will answer that this afternoon for you, either myself or Terry, depending on who your question is directed at. I guess, as of the last few points, we do have some additional resources that you can click on and have access to. We've developed an ebook, and Terry and I last year did do a 3-part webinar series on the PPSR, and there are additional PPSR resources on our website there, and there are the links. In terms of this webinar, it will be up on our website usually within about 48 hours, so you can re-access all of the information and hear our lovely voices and see Terry's face. And if you do have any further questions, you can certainly get in contact with Terry or myself, and we'll have our contact details up there for you to access as well. I wanted to thank you, Terry, for your time this afternoon. You've definitely provided us with some great insight and information. And for our customers out there and your customers and potential customers, there's a lot of points to think about and be aware of in the next few months.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
No doubt see you very shortly.